I know you're all wondering what kind of voice is going to come out. Thanks, Matt. I decided to opt for this handheld this morning just so that if I need to cough, I can cough. I'm sorry about this voice. This is really a unique thing. I wouldn't even call it a cold. It's some kind of a laryngitis deal that has just struck, and yesterday I could almost not voice anything. And do you realize how difficult it is to communicate when you can't say anything? There's probably some of you in the room who others would be really happy if they were a little quieter. But I found it really difficult in the last couple of days to be able to communicate. I was with some friends at a meeting on just a couple nights ago, and one of the gentlemen in the room, we kind of affectionately call him the Godfather. He's got that really low, raspy voice. I don't quite have that yet, so I'll work with what I have. Hopefully, I can also adjust a little bit in terms of what I'm going to, even how I'm going to communicate this morning so that you can hopefully hear and just kind of really enter into what I trust God has for us. It is a delight to be with all of you here at the gathering. I have been here on a couple different occasions and am making the trek to Ottawa a little bit more regularly now in my new role here in the province of Ontario. I live in St. Catharines, as Matt noted. I discovered that on a Good Friday, on a long weekend Thursday night, driving late in the evening through Toronto to Ottawa isn't the best time to travel. It would appear to me that everybody from Toronto is traveling to Montreal, and everybody from Montreal seems to be traveling to Ottawa. I don't know what's with that, but there was certainly lots of cars on the highway. We got into town here about 10:30, 11 o'clock last night. Grateful to make it, grateful to get a little bit of rest before this time together. Annika invited me to just start off this morning by sharing a little bit of who my family is, just so you have a bit of a sense and can put a little bit more together of this puzzle of who this character is up at the front here. So let me just show you a picture from a little while back of my wonderful crew that I'm so pleased and proud and happy to be journeying through life with. There is also another connection with the Ottawa that a few of you, if you've been around 6, 7, 8 years, might actually remember. Because our oldest daughter, she's not here today, but my oldest is on the left here, standing with her now 2-year husband, Eric. Kirsten was actually here in Ottawa for part of a summer. She was doing an internship. I think the church was maybe 2 years old, something like that. It was a summer internship. I don't know if any of you would remember that. It only actually lasted about 4 weeks. Some of you do remember. And she and the young guy that came to do the ministry that summer together with Chris and Adrian, and those of you who were here back then, were actually in an automobile accident. And it immediately stopped their whole summer experience. And I'm that dad that got that phone call, 10 o'clock at night. Kirsten was crying in the hospital saying, "Dad," and then it all tumbled out. And so Karen and I were on the car driving up to Ottawa, picked her up, ended up taking her home, and sort of the whole summer changed. So that's my daughter Kirsten, and that's one of the links that I have with you. Do we have to go to exams, or what do we have to do? No? Okay, good. I also am privileged to have a wonderful wife, Karen, who's right in the middle there. She could not come this time just because it's Friday, right? School. That's probably why the bells and whatnot are going off. Or maybe it's because of Karen. She is having to work this weekend. She's a nurse in St. Catharines, and so our schedule just didn't work out this time. But I'm really delighted that Brianna and Renee are traveling, and I get to spend a little bit of father and daughter's time together with them. And I've also done the thing that a pastor's kid just absolutely hates, but I've done it again. I said, "Girls, do you mind, particularly given the fact that I have no voice today, helping me out?" And they said, "Okay, Dad." So two things that they're going to help me with, just to hopefully make this go a little bit easier this morning. One is my youngest, Brianna, is going to come right now, and she just came back from a experience called Out of Town. Some of you may have heard about that. It's kind of like a gap year just out of high school. We have a university in Winnipeg, and they allow and take students to travel across the country during the first semester. It's sort of a discipleship training kind of program. And then the second semester, they actually spend in a country of choice. There's either Guatemala or South Africa. She chose to go to Guatemala, was learning Spanish, lived with a family down there, traveled all parts of the different country, and I just asked her just in a few seconds to give us a little bit of a window of her experience. So Brianna, please.
Hello. So yeah, as he said, my name is Brianna, and I just returned about like a week ago from Guatemala. And so I was doing the Out of Town program, which is with CMU, and and so I just wanted to kind of give you a little glimpse into what I was taking a part of. One of our weeks that we did a little bit of traveling, we went to a place called Coban, which is kind of central Guatemala, I think. It's pretty remote. And we lived with a couple there who, they're from the States, and they run a program down there for local indigenous people. And so what we did is we worked for a week at their farm. They have a farm, so we built a building. And during that week, they were running a VBS program, or sort of like a VBS program for some of the local Mayan kids. And so there were about 30 kids who were living with us on this farm. And during the week, we hung out with them, and we were doing different things with them. And it was a little difficult because they don't speak Spanish or English, and we spoke a little bit of Spanish and English, but we didn't speak their indigenous tongue, obviously. And so we were living with these kids, and at the end of the week, we were invited to go live in their village for a day. And so we all got in these trucks, in the back of the trucks, and we drove up the mountain, and we were each paired with one of the little kids who were living with us. And so I was paired with a 12-year-old girl. Her name was Laura. And so when we all split off to our houses in the little village, she grabbed my backpack and she walked with me up the mountain to her house. And as soon as I got to the house, her dad quickly came and brought me a chair, and we sat down, and he spoke a little bit of Spanish, so that was nice. And so we just chatted, and we talked about, he was really curious about the English language, and so he'd point to everything, and how do you say this in English? How do you say this in English? And so we had a little book going, and we'd write down the English words every time he'd ask. And so one of the really big things there was that for each meal we were served soup with a big chunk of meat in it, and that's like a big delicacy, and that's really, they really were honoring our like existence in their house. And we had meat for breakfast with soup, which was not okay, but it was their way of welcoming us into their home. And and so we spent the afternoon just speaking to each other in broken Spanish and learning each other's language a little bit. And then with Laura, she had an older sister who was about 14 named Teresa, and we spent the afternoon playing tag on the mountainside, and they live right on the edge of the mountain. And so you stand at the edge of the yard, and it's just like a complete valley, and the mountain goes up on the other side, and you can see everything for miles, and it's gorgeous. And and so we played tag on the mountainside, and I was always it because I just couldn't run on the mountain like they could, and they were just like little mountain goats. It was ridiculous. And so after the day, we all slept in the same room, and we had curtains. They put curtains up in the four corners, and we slept on benches, and it wasn't the most restful sleep, but it was an experience. And then in the morning was probably my favorite part of the whole time. I woke up with the sun and the roosters because that's just how you wake up there. And so it was really early, and so it was freezing too. And I walked into the room next door where they had their kitchen, and so there was a fire going, and they were boiling coffee on the fireplace. And the dad quickly, as soon as he saw me, his face lit up, and he brought a chair over right next to the fire. And I spent the morning just sitting by the fire with the family and eating some bread that they had bought from a tienda, that's a little store, because they knew that that I was a big fan of bread. And so, and so in that moment I felt a lot of peace, and it was just an incredible moment to spend with that family and spend in a different culture. And then our time there came to an end, and Laura grabbed my bag again, and we ran down the mountain together. And as we all got back in the trucks, and as we were driving away from the village, all the kids came running after us, and they were waving and screaming our names. And it was a cool experience. Not everybody gets to live in a Mayan village for a day. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of that experience with you, because I think it's really beneficial to learn about the different cultures. And it was a cool experience. So that was my time in Guatemala.
Thanks, Bree. I had said she could only share 30 seconds, so this is wonderful. I get to hear more of the story as well. I'm also going to invite Renee to come on up, and she's going to help with some of the scripture reading that I'm going to be doing. I won't ask her to do any other sharing, although truth be told, you really need to invite her to come and preach here. She'll probably do an even better job than her old man, so it's good to have Renee helping out. So let me just slip through some of these slides real quick. Oh, I took a picture the last time I was here. I really like that. It's like the church where you just can't leave. That's cool. And you remember that guy? We'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. So it is Good Friday. I don't know what kind of emotions, images, thoughts Good Friday sets off for you. There may be some. For some of you, there may be very, very little for others of you. I want to talk a little bit this morning from the vantage point of two of the individuals who were there, who witnessed the experience, but kind of retroactive, because it's actually on the Sunday rather than the Friday, but they're looking back. And just to kind of give you kind of a bird's eye view from their perspective of how they encountered this Jesus. So you remember some of the story of Good Friday, and I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but you remember the issues of betrayal, the accusations that were falsely trumped up against Jesus. There was all kinds of fear that certainly his disciples had, but I think was kind of gripping the whole town. There was a sentencing that happened to Jesus. There was that violent and brutal death. There was a burial. If you've ever seen, and some of you I'm sure did some years ago when it was quite a big thing, if you ever witnessed The Passion of the Christ, that Mel Gibson movie, you can't help but be gripped with some of what actually transpired that morning and that particular night. But for our purposes today, what I would really like to do is just reflect through the eyes of these two gentlemen. One of them, we know his name is Cleopas, and the other remains unnamed. Two disciples. They had probably just lived through the darkest era of their lives. They're individuals that had really bought into a dream. They had been really passionate about this Jesus. They had thought he's the Messiah. He's going to come. He's going to transform our lives. He's going to change our nation. It's going to be just remarkable, their whole experience. They had really cast their lot with him. But everything unraveled that Good Friday for them. And so we pick up the story for them probably sometime middle of the day on Sunday. And if you do want to follow along in your Bibles, we're going to be reading through Luke chapter 22, but I'll also try to have it here in front of you, and Renee will read it for us. So we'll start off with the first couple verses.
Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened.
They were talking about all that had transpired. If you kind of read between the lines in the story, I'd like to suggest to you that these guys had become disillusioned. Their trust had been broken. They had been part of a new movement. Really, in their time, it was revolutionary. It had offered them hope. Jesus was going to be the Messiah that was going to restore the Jewish nation to some grandeur that they were just very excited about. It offered them something new. But then the tragedy had struck. Their leader had failed them. Their leader had let them down. It would appear that he had been all talk. And they did what so many of us do when we become disillusioned. They walked away. They walked away. You see, they were leaving Jerusalem. They were going back to their predictable lives, back to the routines that were safe, back to a world that certainly would have been filled with uncertainty. And I think it's such a natural response to walk away. When we become disillusioned, it's so easy to walk away. Now, you folks live in the heart of Canada, in a place where everybody trusts their leaders, right? Like Ottawa is the place where we are passionate about all of our leaders. They're faithful. They stand up for us. They do exactly as we expect and anticipate. Right. We become disillusioned by our leaders. I had to think of the senators in Ottawa and not the hockey players. We become disillusioned, right? And it happens time after time after time. I think of people who look to organized religion. Some of you have probably heard of a small pamphlet that was written, study that was done called Hemorrhaging Faith, that talks about how disillusioned so many, particularly of the younger generation, have become about the established church. And certainly within the church, there's all kinds of reasons for us to become disillusioned by the kinds of leaders that purport one thing and live a whole different lifestyle. And so we do just as those men did that Sunday morning. We quietly walk away. It's the easiest thing to do. You just turn your back and say, it's not for me. I'll just go in a different direction. I'll stop going to church because there's really nothing that seems to be making a difference there anyways. I'll just go it alone. We become disillusioned. But in this story, it would seem as though it even went deeper. I would suggest that they became discouraged.
As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast.
You catch that last line? Their faces were downcast. You could see it in their eyes. The sadness, the heartbreak, the regret, the sorrow, the brokenness. They had hoped. They had really hoped that Jesus would be who he claimed to be, the Messiah, that he would change things, that he would be the Savior that they so desperately needed, that we need. They had pinned all their hopes and dreams on him. When our dreams are broken or shattered, it rocks our lives. When you get passed over for that job that you have just been so banking everything on, when you're turned down in a relationship and a relationship gets broken, when you dream to do something in ministry and maybe even set out to do this for a long haul and it doesn't happen, it's not surprising that we become incredibly discouraged, disillusioned, discouraged. But as the story goes on, I think we also see that they were also confused.
One of them, named Clopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since this all took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who had said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see Jesus."
There's an interesting twist in this story, because as they're walking, clearly they're confused about what exactly is transpiring. This new report has just come out that some women have seen the tomb to be empty. It's kind of confusing in terms of what really is transpiring. But as they're walking along, and you noticed it earlier in verse 15, this individual has joined them in their journey. And they don't know who he is. I try to put myself into that imagining situation of what it would have been like that you're walking along and somebody just kind of joins you. I think it was very much part of their culture, starts walking along with them. And they don't perceptually pick up on who this individual is. We know now in hindsight, but in the moment they didn't. They're walking along, they're having this conversation, and he says to them, like, "Tell me the story, what is it?" And you don't know, you haven't heard what's transpired these days. And so the story unpacks, and they retell it to him as best they can. And it gets you thinking. It's got me certainly thinking about this. Isn't it so interesting that sometimes in the most disillusioning, disheartening, discouraging, confusing moments of our lives, Jesus comes along and walks alongside us. It's different in all of our experiences, but it was so real. It was so palpable for them. They didn't see it. They didn't recognize it, but he's with them. He's walking along. And I'm willing to bet that if we were to go around this circle and talk personally about each of your own journeys, I'm guessing almost all, if not all of us, would be able to point to times in our lives where as we were journeying through life and whatever pain and discouragement and hardship we were walking through, all of a sudden we discovered that in somebody that has come into our lives, Jesus is present. It might be a friend. It might be a spouse, a child, a coworker. But somebody comes alongside who actually is the hands and feet of Christ to us. Someone who knows this Jesus and who's living his love and his passion right there in front of us. They offer us patience, a listening ear maybe a big heart, compassion. I've seen this happen time after time after time. It may happen in your house groups. One of the things that I've been really delighted to be a part of in the recent number of months in Niagara is we've started a new sort of intentional ministry focus where we're building relationships with some of the Jamaican migrant workers that come regularly. I had no idea until we started to probe into this how many thousands of workers come to Canada, to Niagara, to other parts of Ontario, to other parts of Canada. And we've been building into these young men relationships, getting to know them. And they're just so incredibly receptive. And so just a few days ago, one of the chaps seems to have come down with some form of diabetes, and so it's really messed with his work. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I had the opportunity to go and just visit with him. And just in that moment, it was nothing spectacular, it wasn't anything earth-shattering, but just realizing that, oh my goodness, I can be, in a very real, tangible way, Jesus to this new friend of mine. And just offer him the love and support that he so desperately needs at this time. They come to Canada, they want to work. As soon as they turn ill or sick, they can just as quickly be shipped back to Jamaica. And I discovered as he was there in the hospital bed, he was almost in tears saying, like, I need this job. I have a 7-year-old little son. His going to school is dependent on my working. I've been in Canada now for 4 weeks, he said, and I've only been able to work the first week and 1 day. Don't get paid until it's completed 2 weeks. Now it's almost a month. No money's been going home. My wife is calling to say we may have to take our little kid out of school. And I thought, I can be those hands and feet of Christ. We've got a group of people that are supporting, walking alongside and encouraging him. I think it's just so beautiful that in this story and in our lives, Jesus walks along. But the story goes on.
He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself.
Jesus took the time to enter into their moment. And of course, he knew way more than we know. He knew exactly what to speak into. He could even be kind of firm and, I wouldn't say harsh, but definitely strong. You foolish guys. Don't you get it? Don't you understand that the Messiah had to come and he had to die? That was always God's plan. Go back to the prophets, go back to Moses. And he kind of begins to walk them through. The story goes on.
As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened up the scriptures to us?"
I don't know if it was just Middle Eastern hospitality, but they said to this stranger, "You know what? It's the time of night where you just simply come, hang out with us." Something was stirring. They couldn't put their finger on it. Come spend the night. Come spend supper together with us. And he did. And then that remarkable moment happened where Jesus, in a moment, we're together going to also share around the communion together. But in that moment, a symbol that has just for the Christian church become so significant through the generations, through the ages, he takes some bread, he breaks it. He passes a piece of bread, he passes a glass of wine to these two men. And all of a sudden, their eyes are opened. They're like, "Oh my goodness, it's true. He's alive. This is Jesus." And just as they're thinking that, it says that he disappeared. And they're left looking at each other. I can only imagine the conversation at that moment between these two guys. He was really here, wasn't he? Like, Cleopas, like, is it just me or? Yeah, that was Jesus. They suddenly recognized him. I don't know if you've had a moment like that in your life, where your eyes are just opened. I point back, I can think of multiple times over my journey. And even as a Christ follower, you continue to have moments, I believe, as you grow in him, where you experience, where your eyes are open to what Christ is doing in your life. I think back to the time when I was just a young kid. I point back to this really early age. I look back now at little 7-year-olds and I go, really? But for me it was so real, it was so vivid. Just as a young little boy, the light going on in my heart saying, Jesus is real. He's alive. He wants to live in me. I think of it as a late teenager. Had the privilege to travel to Australia. And in that travel experience, did some schooling down under. And during that time, had this amazing God encounter where once again my eyes were opened. And I saw in new and fresh ways this Jesus whom I was just getting to know. I think of an experience many years later as a church planter in Halifax. And as God was calling my wife and I into a season of transition, I so remember walking the streets of Halifax, actually in tears and in brokenness and in surrender. And it was as though my eyes were opened again as God was calling us to a whole new journey in our walk with him. I can point to time after time, and I'm guessing that many of us this morning can also point to times where our eyes were open and we recognize that Jesus is alive and he cares so deeply. It can happen anywhere. It can happen this morning. It can happen in a church context. It can happen in a school context. It can happen on your driveway, in a bedroom, in a hotel. It doesn't matter the place. It doesn't matter the location. Suddenly, the confusion, the disillusionment, the misunderstanding is lifted. And we get it. And we see Jesus for who he really is. And just like those gentlemen, we say, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road? Like something was stirring. We were just in the presence of God's Spirit. The story goes on, it says, immediately they returned to Jerusalem. They had to get back to the source. They had to go back to their community, and they returned with much haste. And our last passage goes like this.
They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread.
It is true. They had met the resurrected Christ. They had to go back. They had to hang out with their friends and try to uncover what's really going on here. They went back to discover that some of the leaders as well had seen and had met the resurrected Christ. Their lives would never be the same. I'd like to suggest this morning that each of us, we're on this incredible journey through life. We get to do this journey but once. Sometimes it can be a very, very short experience. And certainly some of the events of this past week in our country remind us of that. I was thinking of those 5 individuals in Calgary who just the other night lost their lives. And you go, how does that happen? And how short. Teenagers, young adults, lives gone. I think of the individual here in this city, Jim Flaherty, passionate leader, loved by so many people. How many times can we say that about our politicians? Fantastic. And yet I think we would agree it was too short. We don't know the length of time that we have. But on this journey, God wants to work in us. He wants to open our eyes. He wants to develop that relationship with us. And I was thinking of all of the many incredible blessings and benefits that we get when we say yes to his invitation to be part of his family. And we could easily go into all kinds of details. I'll just touch on them here just so briefly. But you receive forgiveness from all the brokenness in your life. You're invited into a whole new family. There's a whole new level of friendships, both with the Lord and with each other, that are afforded to those who choose to follow Christ. Jesus said he came to bring us fullness, not just a mediocre life, but a full life. He came to bring us freedom, a fruitful journey through our lives. He came to fill us with his Spirit. And he said he would secure us a future home with a door with your name on it. This morning, in this journey, I just want to invite you and ask you, have you met this Jesus? And have you allowed him to work in your life and just to allow that light to go on in you? He's, even this morning, inviting you to be a part of his family, to be a part of his journey, so that we can move from a life that's so often categorized by disillusionment, discouragement, and confusion, and live a life that is full and free and rich and open. I don't know your stories. I don't know what you're walking through this morning. But wherever you are on this journey, I know that Jesus is walking alongside. And I would pray that even this morning, he would continue to open each of your eyes to what he's doing right now in you. We're going to transition and actually together participate in the Lord's Supper. And so I'm going to invite the band, if you want to come on up to the front. They're going to lead us. And as, I guess maybe it's just Shayla that's going to start us off. She's going to sing a song just of reflection and heart preparation. And as she sings and as the words just kind of flow over you, I want you also to just ponder and think, what would it have been like to have been those two guys seated at that meal together when Jesus came along, broke bread, and they had it together, and their eyes were opened? Shayla.
But today there was fear in his eyes. So I said, Daddy, why are they screaming? Why are the faces of some of them beaming? Why is he dressed in that bright purple robe? And I bet that crown hurts him more than he shows. than all of those guys. Daddy, please tell me why. Why does everyone want him to die? And later that day, the skies grew cloudy, and Daddy said I should go inside. Somehow he knew things would get stormy. Boy, was he right, but I could not keep from wondering if there was something he had to hide. So later that day, I had to find out. I was not afraid of getting lost, so I followed the crowd to a hill where a new man had been killed. And I heard a voice come from the cross. It said, Father, why are they screaming? Why are the faces of some of them beaming? Why are they casting their lots for my clothes? This crown of thorns hurts me more than it shows. Father, please, can't you do something? I know that you must hear my cry. I thought I could handle a cross of this size. Oh, Father, remind me why. Why does everyone want me to die? Oh, when will I understand why? My precious son, I hear them screaming. I am watching the face of the enemy beaming. But soon I will clothe you in robes of my own. Jesus, this hurts me much more than you'll know. But this dark hour, I must do nothing. Though I've heard your unbearable cries. The power in your blood destroys all of their lies. Soon you'll see past their